All right, we are here. What is up, everybody? Carlton Flowers is in the house in my new setup in the new studio. Yes, indeed. Everything is set up. Finally, after much travail, lots of research, hard work. I'm telling you what, it took me a week after giving up, pardon me, long ago, because it was just so jacked up, getting everything set up where I could live stream and the audio works from the microphone, plus the special effects like this. Yay! And I can share on the screen and things aren't showing up backwards. So I'm using this Restream service and I'm using Voice Meter Banana, and everything is finally where I need it to be. I'm still working on doing the transitions from one set to the other, so you just have to bear with me for now. But we're going to do 3 different topics for the live stream tonight. First, we're going to show you the proof. We're going to talk about an article. In fact, we're just going to read through this article and discuss it. That shows the proof that there is corruption within Chicago with the politicians in making alignments and agreements, working with the gangs and the cartel. So I had posted a short talking about this, and some nitwit had commented saying, well, I used to love all your Tiffany Henyard content, and now you're telling me that politicians in Chicago would actually risk their entire career to make an agreement or a deal with some heroin dealer on the street just to get votes. I think you've lost your mind and you're crazy, blah, blah, blah. So what I basically did was, first I flushed him down the toilet. Dumb comment. Of course, a politician's not going to sell out for one heroin dealer. What I was trying to say was that the politicians, before they can even run and get in office, they have to meet with the mafia, with the gang warlords, with the cartel boss leaders before they even put their first sign in yards saying that they're going to run for office. And this is just a first expose of lots of information that I will be sharing with you, digging down deep into the topic. In fact, I'll do a regular video about this, but I wanted to just share this article so you don't have to wait, because I've been promising this for a long time. So what's up, Angie? Yay! Angie is in the house. Anyone else who is watching, post up in the comments and let me know that you are here. So let's see if I can find the article and we will get started. Okay, we're on the desktop and now here's the article. Now let's check in here and tell me if this is showing up backwards. I don't think it is. I think everything is set up right, because when I did the last live stream, it was showing up backwards. So let's go back to the article. I think it's right. I can't show the Restream screen and check it, because then you get that infinite, repeating screen there. So let's check this out. And this comes from the chicagomag.com. So the article reads, gangs and politicians in Chicago, an unholy alliance. So this smacks in the face of all those people who don't believe that politicians are dirty in the city of Chicago. And after we go through this, you're probably going to realize, yeah, this is done on the regular, and you're going to understand why Chicago has a reputation as the most corrupt city in the United States. Worse than New York City. You think the crime families in New York City are bad? No, Chicago is where it all goes down. So let's read through some of this. Lawbreakers, lawmakers. Interesting contrast. In some parts of Chicago, violent street gangs and politicians quietly trade money and favors for mutual gain. The thugs flourish, the elected officials thrive, and you lose. A special report. This is just wow. Totally wow. I'm going to be checking in to see what the comments are as we go through this article. So let's plow through a little bit of the most interesting portion of this. I'm going to go through about half of it. So it starts out talking about this Hal Baskin fellow. And so this is somewhere around 2014. I think this is the time period of where this information was dug up, either 10, 11 years ago, somewhere around there, and he's running for Chicago City Council. So it says Baskin isn't a slick campaign strategist. He's a former gang leader and, for several decades, a community activist who now operates a neighborhood center that aims to keep kids off the streets. Baskin has deep contacts inside the South Side, where I grew up, the South Side's complex network of politicians, community organizations, and street gangs. As he recalls, the inquiring candidates wanted to know, who do I need to be talking to so I can get the gangs on board? So they want the gangs on board so that they can get into office. Now, Baskin, who was himself a candidate in the 16th Ward aldermanic race, which he would lose, was happy to oblige. So he's given up all this information. And he says that he helped broker these meetings between roughly 30 politicians, 10 sitting aldermen, and 20 candidates for city council, and at least 6 gang representatives. That claim is backed up by 2 other community activists, Harold Davis Jr. and Kublai K.M. Toure, who worked with Baskin to arrange the meetings, and a third participant, also a community activist, who requested anonymity. So the gang representatives were former chiefs who had walked away from the day-to-day thug life, but they were still respected on the streets and wielded enough influence to mobilize active gang members. So the first meeting, according to Baskin, occurred in early November of 2010, right before, phone ringing, right before the statewide general election. More gatherings followed in the run-up to the February 2011 municipal elections. The venues included office buildings, restaurants, and law offices. By all accounts, similar meetings took place across the city before last year's elections and in elections past, including after hours at the Garfield Center, a taxpayer-financed facility on the west side that is used by the city's Department of Family and Support Services. That's crazy. All right, so at some of the meetings, the politicians arrived with campaign materials and occasionally with aides. The sessions were organized much like corporate-style job fairs. The gang representatives conducted hour-long interviews, one after another, talking to as many as 5 candidates in a single evening. Like supplicants, the politicians came into the room alone and sat before the gang reps, who sat behind a long table. One candidate said, "I feel like I'm in the hot seat," and Baskin said they were. So, former chieftains, several of them ex-convicts, represented some of the most notorious gangs on the south and west side, okay? Now, it lists these gangs here, and I can vouch for all of these. I remember all of these going on back when we lived in Chicago. Vice Lords, Gangster Disciples, Black Disciples, Cobras, Black P-Stones, and Black Gangsters. So before the election, the gangs agreed to set aside decades-old rivalries and bloody vendettas to operate as a unified political force, which they called Black United Voters of Chicago. They realized that if they came together, they could get the politicians to come to them. This is crazy. All right. So the gang representatives were interested in electing aldermen who were sympathetic to their interests and those of their impoverished wards like O Block. As for the politicians, says Baskin, their interests essentially boiled down to getting elected or reelected. All of the political hopefuls were aware of who they were meeting with. They knew it, and they didn't care. All they wanted to do was to get their support. So then they go on to talk about different people who were in some of these wards that were running. You can read all that. I'll post the link to this when I upload the finalized version of the video. Okay, so let's move on. It says here, it was basically no different than sitting in front of any other panel that asked you questions relative to constituent issues. Craziness. All right, so it gets better. During the meetings, the politicians were allotted a few minutes to make their pitches. The former gang chiefs then peppered them with questions. What would they do about jobs, school safety, police harassment, help for ex-cons? But in the end, as with most things political in Chicago, it all came down to one question. The community activist who helped Baskin with some of the meetings said this. He recalls that the gang representatives asked, "What can you give me?" And then the politicians would answer, "Well, what do you want?" The street gangs have been a part of Chicago politics at least since the days of the notorious First Ward bosses, Bathhouse John Coughlin and Michael Hinky Dink Kenna. Look up your history on this, who a century ago ran their vice-ridden Levy district using gangs of toughs armed with bats and pistols to bully voters and stuff the ballot boxes. That's 100 years ago, guys. All right, so gangs and politics have always gone together in this city, says John Hagedorn, a gang expert and professor of criminal justice at the University of Illinois at Chicago. It's a shadowy alliance, he adds, that is deeply ingrained in Chicago's political culture. You take care of them, they'll take care of us. To what extent do the gangs influence and corrupt Chicago politics today? That's a good question. And what are the consequences for the ordinary citizens? To find out, Chicago, the ChicagoMag.com, conducted more than 100 interviews with current and former elected officials and candidates, gang leaders, senior police officials, rank and file cops, investigators, and prosecutors. It's pretty thorough. We also talked to community activists, campaign operatives, and criminologists. We limited our scope to the city, though alliances certainly exist in some gang-infested suburbs. And we focused exclusively on what? Democrats. Yeah, Democrats, since they are the dominant governing party and in the state. Now, I didn't say that. I know people get upset when I talk bad about Democrats, but hey, it's right here in the article, and we do know that the Democratic Party has run Chicago for, I don't know, my entire life, and I'm 58 years old. All right. Moreover, we looked at the political influence of street gangs only, not of traditional organized crime. A worthy subject for another day. Now, let's go through the findings, and then we'll run to the next topic, and then we'll check in with the comments. So, findings. While they typically deny it, of course, many public officials, mostly but not limited to aldermen, state legislators, and elected judges routinely seek political support from influential street gangs. Meetings like the ones Baskin organized, for instance, are hardly an anomaly. Gangs can provide a decisive advantage at election time by performing the kinds of chores patronage armies once did. Wow. And so it's a part of getting into office. Next one, in some cases, the partnerships extend beyond the elections in troubling and possibly criminal ways, greased by the steady and largely secret flow of money from gang leaders to certain politicians and vice versa. The gangs funnel their largest through opaque businesses or front companies and through under-the-table payments. Who did that make you think of right off the bat? Stupor Mayor Tiffany Henyard. In turn, grateful politicians use their payroll or campaign funds to hire gang members, just like Tiffany Henyard did. You know, she had all those ex-cons and felons that were on her payroll to pull the strings for them to get jobs or contracts. You remember those no bid contracts? We talked about that all the time. Or offer other favors. Wow. I can't wait to get into this next story here that talks about the prisoner shuffle. Okay. Now, the last one goes even further. Most alarming, both law enforcement and gang sources say, is that some politicians ignore the gang's criminal activities. They ignore it. That's why you don't hear the infamous 6% approval rating Mayor Brandon Johnson, talking much about the fact that he is in charge of the most corrupt city in the United States. They just sweep it under the rug. Some go so far as to protect gangs from the police, tipping them off to impending raids or to surveillance activities. In effect, creating a safe haven in their political districts. Now, you remember a few videos ago, I talked about the 911 911 service when you call and it takes forever. And I had someone comment telling me that sometimes it takes 2 hours for the police to show up when you call 911. That was one of the members, okay, who lives on the south side of my old neighborhood. And then when I did that short, the same idiot who said I was off my gourd for insinuating that politicians make deals with gang leaders, he also said that there's no such thing going on with the 911 service and why they're so slow as far as the corruption and the agreements between the politicians and the gangs. And then we see this coming from ChicagoMag.com and all of their interviews where they come to this conclusion, stating that they are holding back the police from encroaching on the criminal enterprises. And then you think that the 911 response time that has gone from what was it, 28 minutes to 58 minutes, whatever I said in that last report, in the last few years, it's doubled. And you think that has nothing to do with these dirty politicians? Well, if you don't, then I got a bridge I'd like to sell you. Last sentence says, and often they chafe at backing tough measures to stem gang activities. Who's that sound like? Mayor Brandon Johnson. Advocating instead for superficial solutions that may garner good press but have little impact. That's a good transition because next we're going to shoot over to this idiot in charge. And we're going to see how much of this interview that we can stomach. And then I'm going to stop along the way and we will discuss it. So let me jump over here and see what's going on in the comments. Yeah, this is pretty crazy, ain't it, Angie? It is absolutely crazy. This is just stark raving craziness. I got to figure out how I can do the comment screen without getting my infinite screen there because I click over to check out what's going on with the comments. So I have yet to figure that out. So anyway, let's move on. And here is this idiotic mayor. I don't know how much of this I'm going to be able to handle, but we'll just talk about, we'll try to survive 2 or 3 minutes of it before we get to the last topic, which gets on the topic of Hakeem Jeffries and this whole meme situation that's going on. So let's tune in, listen to Brandon Johnson, and let's just react to some of the crap that is coming out of his mouth, which it's pretty shocking. I mean, this is not, I'm not putting down all Democrats. This is just a Democrat that makes the party look really, really bad. All right, let's kick this off.
And good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I'm grateful to all of the elected leaders here, the community, business, and faith leaders that are joining us today. Many Chicagoans were shocked and appalled to see videos of heavily armed, masked federal agents in our streets yesterday. The reality is that this stunt has nothing to do with public safety. This is about politics, money, and power.
Oh gosh, I can't even get by that. He said it's a stunt. That's so offensive. You're sending in reinforcements to get rid of people that are committing crimes on the streets, because you won't, because you're like down 2,000 officers. But then when the feds step in and do it for you, it's a stunt. Oh, okay, that's strike one. Moving on.
The president is using his militarized force the exact way he intended to advance his political goals. He wants to militarize our cities, whether that's through ICE or through the National Guard or the United States Army.
Okay, moron. So he's just doing it to politicize or to militarize your city. What about half of the people who are saying we don't want to be held victims to crime? Be held victim to crime. The shootings, which of course he claims the crime is down because we're down from 700 murders a year to 500, so hey, let's celebrate 500 murders. What about the people who are disgusted with the fact that there's no support from you with law enforcement? Could that possibly be it? Maybe so.
Or armed forces. He wants to provoke conflict so that he can use this as a pretext to send even more federal agents into our city. What we saw yesterday was an absolute disgrace. Families, visitors, everyday Chicagoans were out enjoying our city, and they were met with dozens of heavily armed federal agents aiming to strike fear in our communities.
Okay, I gotta stop you on that one. So yeah, when they raided and arrested the 1,000 people, yesterday? Okay, so there was some residents that were terrorized by that, but it's because there was a bunch of Tren de Aragua gang members that lived in their apartment complex. So, are they just there to strike fear, or are they there to fulfill the promise that was made to us that the federal government would get rid of the 30 million illegal aliens that flooded into the country during the Biden administration, so we don't have to pay for their health care, their food services, welfare, Social Security, and everything else under the sun? Could it be that? I don't know. Well, let's continue on.
They targeted street vendors and construction workers, just trying to make an honest living.
Trying to make an honest living? How do you make an honest living by entering into the country illegally? That's a misnomer, but they're trying to make an honest living. And of course, they're going to target the street vendors and construction because that's where all the illegals are working. Duh. All right, let's move on.
They made a little girl act as a translator as they took her family into custody. These are heartbreaking scenes that have nothing to do with making our city safer.
Okay, so this is a tactic, and this is a big difference between a lot of conservatives and a lot of liberals. So people like Brandon Johnson say stuff like, a little girl had to provide translation as they were taking away her family, because he knows that that's going to trip the emotional trigger, because liberals tend to get triggered from emotions, just like the black woman who was on the news yesterday that stated that the ICE agents, as they were raiding, she said, there's kids in here, you're scaring the kids. And then she claims that the ICE agent said, F those kids. Now, there's no recording of it, no proof whatsoever. And then, of course, PMSNBC made that into a headline story and repeated that. And they said, after showing the interview, the anchor goes, F those kids, and just looked distraught, because they know that this is going to trigger the liberals. Liberals get triggered from the emotional aspect of ejecting all of these illegals. So that's what he's doing. He knows that he can garner support by triggering people's emotions. Wow.
My question to these masked, heavily armed individuals is simple. What could you possibly need an automatic weapon for? The only plausible explanation is that their aim is not to carry out their duties, but instead strike fear in our community.
Okay, that's like one of the most idiotic things I've ever heard. So you got gangbangers with switches, the switches they put on the guns to turn them into fully automatic weapons. And then you're saying, what does a National Guard person need with an automatic weapon? Oh my gosh. So you're just there to scare people. Right.
If you are following the law, if you are in accordance with the Constitution, if you have a criminal warrant, then there is no reason to cover your face. This comes on the heels of the revelation that was reported on MSNBC that Tom Homan, the so-called border czar, accepted a $50,000 bribe from undercover FBI agents in exchange for lucrative detention center contracts.
Okay, first of all, I don't even know if it's true. I don't know if I believe it. I'm looking into that. I totally don't believe it. But how can you call out Tom Homan when you live in the most corrupt city in the United States? Okay? How about that little room where you got all your little Gucci handbags and your Louis Vuitton gear and your $200-$300 ties and all of the hats, all the gifts in the gift room, which the rumor is that stuff is coming from the gang warlords, okay? The gift room. How can you sit here and you're talking about Tom Homan and a $50,000 bribe when we know you're making a whole hell of a lot more than that? Because what else would explain the fact that you spent $600 million of taxpayers' money to haul in all those illegals and give them free room and board and jobs and everything else under the sun? But you're talking about Tom Homan.
So let's call it what it is. Tom Homan sold out the American people for $50,000 in cash.
Yeah, but you sold out the whole city of Chicago for $600 million. Oh my God, I can't take any more of that. Let's go to the next topic. I can't stomach listening to that man for more than just a few minutes at a time. So post in the comments, what do you think of Brandon Johnson? I see Angie said that she would rather be militarized than to be run by gangsters. I agree. If I was on the South Side, I'd be welcoming the National Guard, bringing them water, asking them if they want some lunch. I can run to McDonald's for you, bring you some tacos, whatever you need. I'm here to make you feel welcomed and make your stay the best day you've ever had. If you're protecting me from all of these idiots that are out here shooting every night, every day, on the daily, murders on the daily. Okay, so moving right along. Now we're going to check out this. This is pretty hilarious. This meme that came out. I hadn't seen this one. We're going to play the one that I just discovered, and then the one that Trump put out there that caused all of the kerfuffle, all of the reaction from the Democrats that called this racist. So Hakeem Jeffries, in response to the original meme that President Donald Trump posted, here he is on PMSNBC stating that it's racist, and then watch what